Hello from Bewley, this is David Lloyd welcoming you to Making Tracks, Nissan's news and music audio magazine. Bewley is home to the National Motor Museum, just one of the great days out you can save money on with your special Making Tracks vouchers. Later we'll be having a look around the museum and talking to its founder, Lord Montague. And we'll be bringing you a whole host of other special features, including the latest electronic navigation aid, life on the road with the traffic police, some practical advice on avoiding car sickness, and a serious look at safety for lady drivers travelling alone. But first, let's take an altogether different look at motoring as we go on patrol with the road traffic police. Is it all about flashing blue lights and high-speed pursuits, or more a case of just sitting, watching and waiting? To find out, we head north to a rather busy stretch of the A1 near York, where the Making Tracks team is out on patrol with Neil Carter of the North Yorkshire Traffic Police.
The popular idea of a traffic cop's working day, driving around in fast cars, sirens wailing, the shift of blur, frenetic activity. Well, while there is some of that, of course, the job in the main involves patrolling a beat and keeping an eye out for... Well, that's what we're about to find out as I join Neil Carter, a traffic policeman in North Yorkshire for 11 years, when he began his shift patrolling the A1 and A19. Our first job of the day, though, had us both wishing we'd paid more attention in French class at school, as Neil did his level best to remind a French HGV driver of the speed limit on the A1.
Anglais? No. Speed? What's your speed limit?
See, we're just checking his tachograph chart, and it's just below 100 k's. Well, 100 k's is 62 miles an hour, and the legal limit is 80 k's. So we can see by that he's been exceeding the speed limit.
So you'll be able to explain to him using the tachograph, presumably, about the speed limit?
That's right, yeah, hopefully.
Limite 80. Okay. No more. All right?
So here we are on patrol. What exactly is it you're looking out for, then?
We're looking at the vehicles as they're coming past us, who's driving them, what age they are, the manner of the driving, the condition of the vehicle, and generally your instinct and intuition. Just want to check that car in front. Is it your vehicle?
Yeah.
Do you have some form of identification with you, please, sir?
That'll do, that's fine. Hill Farms. Yep, that's it, yeah.
Your excise licence, I can see it now, it's actually laid on your dashboard. If you wouldn't mind having it displayed on your windscreen, obviously it is an offence not to do that, but obviously we'll just warn you on this occasion. All right, sir, so it wants to be stuck on your windscreen. All right now? Okay now, cheerio.
Well, that's a good case in point, perhaps, of how to deal maybe with the traffic police. He was very civil with you, wasn't very polite. Do you get most are? But amazingly enough, some people do take exception to being stopped by the police, as Gavin Douglas can testify.
I've seen drivers jump out of their cars and start shaking fists and pointing fingers at policemen for no apparent reason. Yeah, these people are there to help us. They're not always there to prosecute us, they are there to help us.
What about some of the new things that have been brought in? Are the police quite hot on that? For instance, the rear seatbelt rule.
The police are currently advising people that there is a new legislation in place that rear seatbelts are now a legal requirement. Where fitted, they must be worn. Also, another one that people aren't very aware of at the moment is the new law regarding windscreen washers. If your windscreen washer bottle is empty, it's an offence. Your windscreen washers must operate at all times. So if you've let your bottle run dry, you're committing an offence.
And the legal requirements, what are you legally obliged to give the police if they so demand?
You must be prepared to give him your date of birth, your name and address. And also, if it's different, the name and address of the owner of the vehicle. Obviously, if you're in a company car, if you're in somebody else's car, you'd be required to give their name and address as well. The other one, of course, is your documents. He may ask you to produce your documents. That's your driving licence, your registration document, and your insurance certificate, and where applicable, a car over 3 years old, an MOT certificate as well. Obviously, a current MOT and a current insurance. It's no good bringing last year's because they'll not be too happy about that. You have 7 days to produce without fear of prosecution.
Here Here at Bewley, there's loads to see for the whole family. From the earliest motorised carriages to today's powerful Grand Prix races, the exhibition leads you through more than a century of motoring history. And almost every car has been lovingly restored to its original working condition. But the location of Bewley itself has a history which dates back to long before the dawn of the motoring era. Lord Montague is the museum's founder and the present overseer of the Bewley estate.
Lord Montague, you founded the Montague Motor Museum, which later became the National Motor Museum, in memory of your father. Can you tell us a little about him?
Yes, he was born in the 1860s, and he started life with great interest in railways, because, of course, motor cars didn't exist in those days. But once the motor car came along, he deserted his first love. He was, in fact, a qualified engine driver, and took up the new sport, or whatever you could call it. And of course, in those days, there was great anti-motorist feeling everywhere. And as an MP for the New Forest, he really was the champion of the motorist cause in the House of Commons and later in the House of Lords. In fact, it was his bill in 1903 which makes us all have number plates on our car, and incidentally at the time raised the speed limit from 12 to the dreadful high speed of 20.
When you first opened the Montague Motor Museum, you began by displaying just a few historic cars. How did the museum develop from there?
Well, to begin with, quite frankly, as you say, it was a memorial to my father, and I had no intention that it should grow. But of course, good things do grow, and the public obviously liked it, and more cars came offered, and I got bitten by the bug, and we overflowed into the kitchens and the cellars and everywhere else, and eventually had to build a special building outside the house to house the cars, which was a rather good thing because the whole house was beginning to smell of oil.
But it's much more than a motor museum, Bewley, isn't it? It's steeped in history as well.
Indeed, yes. Of course, the public see for exactly the same ticket my home palace house, the Abbey and the Abbey ruins and the gardens. And so it is, in fact, a good day out for everybody. Even if you're not interested in cars, you'll find something here which you will really like.
The grounds are beautiful and the house is magnificent. How did it come into your family?
Well, the King John granted the land at Bewley to the Cistercian monks in 1204, and they built a big monastery here, which was, of course, destroyed, like so many others, by Henry VIII in 1538. And certain buildings were left, and my ancestor bought the abbey, sold off the stone, and turned a part of it into a residence. And it's the great gatehouse of Bewley Abbey, which is now Palace House.
Later on, we'll be taking you on a guided tour round Bewley and exploring a few of the museum's more unusual exhibits. If you're one of those unfortunate people who suffer from travel sickness, our next feature will be of particular interest to you. Dr. Eric Sigman is from BBC's Going Live television show. Let's start really at the basics. What's the cause of this problem?
Most people wrongly assume that what makes you sick is simply having your stomach bumped up and down during a car journey. But the truth is very different. What makes you sick is the fact that when you're moving in a car or in a plane or on a ship, your eyes are registering some of the movement, but your inner ears, which really deal with balance in your body, are registering a completely different sort of movement. The signals are conflicting, and that conflicting sense of signals causes people to feel sick.
It seems to be a fairly common thing in terms of passengers, but perhaps less so for the drivers. Is that true?
Drivers tend to like driving, and they're probably experienced, which is why we know them as drivers. Also, they often fixate on a distant point, and that also seems to prevent people from feeling sick.
So they're always looking out the window?
They're always looking out the window, often at something quite far away, in the same way that a ballerina does. If you notice how a ballerina turns around and whips her head around looking at the same point each time, it's to make sure she has a constant frame of reference, so her vision is always stable. And it's the same thing for people in the car, that those who manage to look at a distant point, or actually told to look at a distant point, are less likely to feel sick.
Any parent will know that it's particularly prevalent with children. Why is that?
Children are still developing, and their ability to tolerate this conflict between what their eyes see and what their balance system tells them is much more immature than in adults.
So we know the causes. What can we do about it in terms of perhaps planning the journey?
Okay, in terms of planning the journey, there are several things you have to think about. One of them is the obvious: don't drink alcohol and don't have a heavy meal if you know you're prone to car sickness. The second thing is, again, a self-help measure that we touched upon before, which is, if you can, try to keep fixated on distant points so you have a frame of reference, so that regardless of how much a car bumps up and down, you feel stable because you're looking at a stable point. And hopefully this message will get through to your brain and prevent you from feeling sick. Of course, if that doesn't seem to work, then there are an awful lot of medications that you can buy over the counter at the chemist. Most of them are antihistamines, and there are some drawbacks in that antihistamines, as we know, even for hay fever, do have some side effects such as drowsiness, etc. But there are also a couple of other developments. I think the most effective one on the market right now is a drug called hyoscine, and that's a prescription-only medicine which your GP can prescribe, but it's very effective. And the best form of that comes in the form of a skin patch, which you put behind your ear. A small amount of this drug will go into your system. You have to use it about 5 or 6 hours ahead of time. And though there can be side effects, they tend to be limited to just a bit of a dry mouth. And so I would have thought that is the best suggestion if you're someone who really is prone to being sick in the car.
Just referring back to your advice about staring at a fixed, distant point, presumably that means you shouldn't read as a passenger either.
Yes, there are some people who aren't affected by motion sickness, but once they start to read in the car, they feel nauseous and they get motion sickness. And it seems to be, again, that what their eyes are reading on a page seems to jump about a slight bit and confuses their balance system.
We've spoken about the pharmaceutical remedies, and you say that they're quite effective. What about these old wives' tales? Well, are they indeed old wives' tales? I'm thinking about sitting on a newspaper or some brown paper, or indeed those anti-static devices that dangle from the back of your cars. Is there any medical reason why these should work?
The only thing that's effective in terms of what you sit on is how high it is. If you're a child and you're sitting so low down that you can't see the horizon, that's likely to make you car sick. In terms of static electricity, that is not the cause of motion sickness, and though it's not very pleasant to get a shock when you touch the car to open the door, it causes other problems. Motion sickness is not one of those problems.
Presumably, if the situation is particularly severe, it's something you should talk to your doctor about, isn't it?
Yes, the most effective remedies for car sickness are prescription only, and you should see your GP about it. And a lot of people assume it's simply a petty thing which GPs will not be interested in. Of course it isn't petty, and it can make a lot of people's lives a real misery. It's easily dealt with, so go and see your GP.
Again, there's a full checklist of those suggested remedies and the precautions you should take in your Making Tracks booklet. Remember, though, if the problem persists, then do see your doctor about it. There's nothing more likely to spoil an otherwise perfect day out than feeling poorly all the way there and all the way back. But what about planning a trip, deciding how to get there before you set off? Road maps are of limited use because they provide little clue as to which of the many possible routes will get you there with the minimum of fuss. But now there's a new solution, a gadget that could soon make wrestling with road maps a thing of the past.
It sounds more like an electronic computer game than a navigation aid, but the handheld Columbus Route Finder promises to help relieve some of the stress of long-distance driving. It provides the driver with the quickest route, avoiding traffic hold-ups. It also gives an estimated time of arrival and a calculation of the travel costs. I took Columbus for a test drive one rainy morning with Nick Dearsley, who co-designed and developed the product. So we're now programming Columbus.
Right, so I've entered that we're going to leave from Highgate Village in Greater London, and we could try Stanmore, perhaps. So I type in Stanmore. Right, it's calculated that journey's 9 miles and it should take us 20 minutes. And it's given us our arrival time as estimated. Yes, the arrival time in Stanmore at 10:15.
Let's see how close to that we are.
Right. Now, to get the first stage of the journey, we press the down button, take the A1000 through to Highgate, and that's 0.7 miles. The best part about Columbus is the fact that all the roads, literally all the roads, have been driven to give you an idea of why that is an advantage. If you've got an ordinary map, you may look at it and say, okay, it's quite clear to me, you might think that this is the best route, because looking at a map, you're going to basically take the obvious straight line route from A to B. But of course that doesn't allow for the fact that some of the roads that you've picked may be notoriously bad for traffic, or they may be rather smaller than you thought on the map. Whereas the Columbus will calculate the journey based on somebody's previous driving experience. If the traffic is very bad, what you do is you press a button which asks you, well, you tell it that you'd like a traffic reroute. And what that does is to assume that the road ahead you no longer want to proceed on. So the Columbus calculates a different journey, avoiding the road ahead, but still gets you to your destination. If you hear on the radio, for example, you're heading up the M1 that the traffic's bad and you're at junction 7 and you're at junction 5, hit the traffic reroute button, it'll take you off at junction 6 and reroute you round the problem and get you back on a few miles further up. The next place we're going to arrive at is the junction of the A41 and the A5. So this is it. Stay on the A410 to Stanmore. Information at the roundabout, take the set which I've just done.
And here we are in Stanmore.
That's right. In fact, we have in fact arrived a little early. According to my watch, what do you reckon?
10:14.
10:14.
And we were estimated to arrive at 10:16.
10:16. So we've arrived nearly 2 minutes early.
Absolutely perfect.
Sorry about that.
If you would like a chance to win a Columbus route finder, take a look in your Making Tracks booklet, where we're running a special competition. Just answer the question correctly, and very soon the latest in-car navigation aid could be yours. The new Nissan Primera Series 2 range is a major breakthrough in car safety. Nissan has made major improvements to the Primera, already Which Car magazine's 1993 Saloon Car of the Year. Electronic anti-lock brakes are now standard on every model. This is the first time a major manufacturer in the UK has fitted ABS as standard throughout its entire medium-sized family car range. Other new safety features include side door impact beams, energy-absorbing steering wheel and flame-retardant upholstery. The introduction of 2 new multi-point fuel-injected petrol engines gives increased power and greater fuel economy. And revised specification on many models keeps the Nissan Primera right where it belongs, at the top of its class. Micra maintains its award-winning form. Since being voted Car of the Year for 1993, the new Nissan Micra has continued to collect honours throughout Europe. It recently received the Red Star, Germany's top industrial design award for its safe, sociable and cheerful design. And in June, the Micra was given a top British Environmental Award, presented to Nissan at Buckingham Palace for all-round ecological concern. Earlier in the year, What Car magazine voted the Micra their top Super Mini, and the innovative advertising campaign has also come in for major praise, earning 4 separate honours at this year's Campaign Press Advertising Awards, including Best Campaign of the Year, beating the widely praised Levi advertising campaign. Incidentally, there are lots of new Micra ads planned, so keep an eye out for further adventures of the now legendary Micra shape motif. Nissan's new all-roader, Terrano 2. The latest addition to Nissan's successful range of 4x4 vehicles is the Terrano 2. The new vehicle, known as an all-roader, is capable of handling tough off-road terrain, as well as being designed to give car-like levels of ride comfort and handling under normal road conditions. A truly versatile vehicle, the new Nissan Terrano 2 is available as either a 3 or 5 door with 5 or 7 seats, and with a choice of petrol or turbo diesel engines. Sunny GTI goes to the rescue. 5 Nissan Sunny GTIs are now helping the Cornish Air Ambulance Service to save lives. Each one has been specially equipped with over £10,000 worth of medical apparatus, turning it into an extremely effective, fast-response paramedic vehicle. The Sunny's excellent handling and powerful engine, combined with the safety of anti-lock brakes, make it ideal for the job. The 5 cars are already in daily use and are proving an indispensable asset for the paramedic teams. Driving is, for many of us, a necessary part of everyday life, and getting from A to B safely and without incident is something which many of us take for granted. But for some, in particular female drivers, there are some very real worries about safety. If your car breaks down, you can find yourself in a very vulnerable position. So what are the measures that women, or indeed anyone, can take to help ensure personal safety when driving alone? With me is Rosemary Graham of the RAC. Rosemary, let's take a look at one of the scenarios, one which perhaps is on the mind of many women drivers, breaking down perhaps on a busy motorway, pulling into the hard shoulder on their own.
Well, 2 things I'd like to say about that. First of all, yes, of course, that's a problem for women, but it is also a problem many of my male colleagues say that's something they dread as well. The disabled community terrible problem if that happens to them. So, of course, women are among a group of vulnerable people. They're not the only vulnerable people. But yes, that is something they absolutely dread. And there are clear guidelines as to what you do and what you don't do in those circumstances. And again, knowing what the rules are will help diffuse the fear. And that's something that we at the RIC are trying to encourage in women. Know what to do. Here are the guidelines.
Can we look at some of those rules? What would you suggest?
The first thing to do, pull in onto the hard shoulder, but bear in mind that the hard shoulder is a very dangerous place to be. Get out of the car on the passenger side, of course. Get out of the car, lock the rest of the car, but leave the passenger side open so that if someone comes up who looks fairly dodgy, you can quickly get back into the car and lock it behind you. Now, ideally, we would say have a car phone if you possibly can, because that means you can make a quick phone call rather than having to pull in, walk to the phone. Now, if it's pouring rain, obviously you're worried. Then if it's night, etc., you can put up a sign that says, "Help, please, call police." There are mixed views on that. Some people feel that actually that is drawing attention to the fact that you're vulnerable. But the police are currently issuing those signs, and in the main, we would say have them and use them. But judge each situation on its merit. I say there is no one golden rule for all situations.
So when you've made the call, you walk back to the car, the passenger door's open, and I believe, particularly in bad weather when you can't really sit outside the car, you say sit in the passenger seat, don't you?
By sitting in the passenger seat, you can give the impression that you're actually waiting for the driver to come back.
So that's motorway problems, moving back onto the other roads and trying to find somewhere to park. It's never easy, and really your criterion is finding a convenient parking space as quickly as possible. And perhaps when you come back to that parking space later on in the evening, it's a very different ball game. What sort of things should we be bearing in mind when finding a parking space?
First of all, if you're in a multi-storey, try whenever possible to park on the ground floor. Try and park, if you possibly can, near the lift or near the stairs. Go into that car park with your keys to the ready, with your money to the ready. Go straight to the car and get in very quickly. Don't mess about, just get on with it and get out very quickly. Now, if when you get to the car you happen to notice that there's somebody there you're not very happy about, don't proceed. Again, if you happen to have a mobile phone or if you know that there's a phone nearby, and always check that there is a public phone nearby, go and phone the police. Don't venture in there by yourself. If the worst comes to the worst and you are tackled, all else has failed and you find yourself about to be mugged, for goodness sake, give the handbag over. What we would advise is, if at all possible, try not to carry your purse or your plastic in the handbag. Try and carry that in a pocket.
Another worry we've heard about recently has been the menace of people sort of driving very close behind you. You get the impression you're being followed. They might flash your lights and pretend that something's wrong with your car.
Yeah.
This must be incredibly...
I think that's my personal chief bugbear. That's something that I must say does really worry me and cause me great concern as an individual. Advice there is pull in if you possibly can. Turn on your rear lights. Sound your horn very, very loudly. Draw as much attention to yourself as possible if you really are convinced that the chap is wishing you ill. If you've got a phone, try and use the phone to call for help. Very often it isn't menace. Very often it's somebody who doesn't realise that they are actually driving as close to you as they are. But it's best in those circumstances to play safe.
Now, there are workshops, aren't there, to develop some of these issues, looking at routine car maintenance and that sort of stuff?
Nissan dealerships are actually running those, and we would commend them very, very much to women Nissan motorists. Again, there's the support group element. You go along, there are other women there, you realise they've similar difficulties, and you will get tip-top advice and tip-top guidance there. So I would strongly commend those to your drivers.
In your Making Tracks booklet, you'll find all the contact names and numbers you need to find out more about personal safety for motorists, plus details of how to get hold of a personal distress alarm at a special price for Making Tracks listeners. As promised, let's conclude this edition of Making Tracks with a guided tour around Bewley to enjoy some of the Motor Museum's biggest attractions. And if you've ever wondered why powerful engines and fast cars have been the obsession of so many through the years, just have a listen to this. The
glorious sound of a 4.5-litre supercharged engine. It belongs to a fully operational 1930 Bentley, just one of the fine collection of classic cars and motorbikes at the National Motor Museum at Bewley in Hampshire. I spent a day at the museum looking at some of the fabulous cars and bikes that make up the history of British motoring. Graham Jones was my guide and pointed out first a luxurious white Art Deco motor, complete with white wall tyres.
This is the Auburn. It was actually reputed to be owned or used by Marlene Dietrich, and it was seen in the film Desiree, and it's a car that we regularly use because it still drives very well, and it's got a beautiful purr to its engine. As you can see, it's got a lot of chromy exhausting coming out of the side. It's still in beautiful condition, very delicate trim all around the car.
And it says supercharged.
Supercharged. It's one of the most powerful cars in the museum of its time. It could do it in excess of 100 miles an hour in the 1930s.
The museum traces motoring history from the early pioneers of the 1880s through to the record breakers of the 1990s. Pride of place goes to the collection of 4 pristine Rolls-Royces, the name we've come to regard as the last word in style and luxury. As well as the Edwardian elegance of the 1907 Silver Ghost, you can also experience the sight and sound of another classic Rolls.
This is the 1914 Rolls-Royce Alpine Eagle, and you're going to hear one of the classic sounds of the days is the klaxon, which used to make a rather loud noise as people were running in front of the car trying to get out of the way.
Many of the cars in the museum have appeared in films or TV series. Now this car looks familiar.
This is the Aston Martin 1964 DB5, otherwise known to many as the James Bond car. It was used in the film Goldfinger and then in the opening credits of Thunderball. And as you can see, it still has the special effects that made it famous in the films. It has an ejector seat, it has machine guns that come out the front, it has revolving number plates, it has wheel axles that come out and slice other cars to pieces, and it even spurts oil and smoke out of its rear.
Let us into the secret. Do all these special effects really work?
All of them work apart from the ejector seat.
One of the most famous cars to appear on film was in for repair at the museum's restoration workshop, which is also open to public view. But there was a particular problem with this movie star, as Doug Hill, museum supervisor, explained.
As you can see, we're looking down here on a car with an aeroplane engine in, and that's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the very first Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and that's got a Benz airship engine in. And, I mean, where do you get airship bits?
And what else can we see being restored?
OK, we have a 1906 Renault, which is in for an engine rebuild. An 1899 Fiat, which is possibly one of the oldest Fiats in the world, which we are re-restoring. We also have an 1896 Arnold Benz, which is one of the very first cars to run from London to Brighton in 1896 in the famous Emancipation Run, which was the abolition of the Red Flag Act. And this car in 1896 actually made it in 11 hours from London to Brighton.
Explain the Red Flag Act to me.
OK, well, the Red Flag Act basically meant if any self-propelled vehicle prior to November the 14th in 1896 went through a village or town, the owners of horses, the leaders of horses and pedestrians needed to be warned that there was this horrible clanky smelling machine coming to frighten their horses and their children. So they required the pace of the vehicle to be kept regulated at 4 miles an hour, which is the brisk walking pace. And so the best way to do it, they felt, was to have a man walking in front with a red flag.
From the 4 miles an hour limit of the Red Flag Act, we finally moved to the thrilling speed of the Grand Prix race circuit. Graham Jones again.
This is the lineup of Grand Prix cars or racing cars. We have a present-day Marlboro McLaren. We also have Williams, which was driven by Nigel Mansell. Nigel came down and visited us last year and sat in his old car. Lord Montague invited him down, and we also had him drive some of our older vehicles, a 1903 Napier, which is the oldest racing car in the country. And it was the Napier that invented the term racing green because of its distinctive green colouring. And Nigel actually had a moan about that. He said the clutch was too heavy for him.
So here we see the distinctive golden black colours of the John Player Special.
Yes, of course, you don't see them around now in Grand Prix racing, but in its time in the 70s, this was one of the most famous cars on the circuit. The John Player Special, as it was known, this was a 1977 vehicle, and it was driven by Gunnar Nielsen, who won the 1977 Belgian Grand Prix, and again by Ronnie Peterson in the 1978 South African Grand Prix. It was the car that invented the term ground effects. They were the first company to lower the suspension, bring everything nearer to the ground, and very streamlined. And many cars today still look very similar to this.
And next door to it is a Lotus from many years before.
Now this Lotus 1967 49 R3 is very famous. It was driven by Graham Hill and Jim Clark. Many people will remember Jim Clark racing this Lotus round for many victories. Graham Hill only drove it a few times, but it actually got presented to the museum in the 70s, and Damon Hill, when he was very young, came down with his mother after the tragic death of his father to present this car to the museum, and maybe one day we can get him to come back and drive it, because it still works.
We finished the tour just in time to take the last bus home. The replica 1914 bus, that is.
And that's all for this edition of Making Tracks. There's more information in your Making Tracks booklet, with extra details on some of the features you've heard. And don't forget, there are lots of special money-saving offers on great days out for you and the family. There's also a terrific free entry prize draw, offering you the chance to win a holiday for the whole family in Toronto, including a visit to Canada's top theme park, Wonderland. Full details on your entry form are in your Making Tracks pack. I hope you enjoy the music selection on side B. Until next time, goodbye.